Okay, so textures. Why is texture so important? Textures is so important because it gives a certain light to your book cover. Now let's look at this book. This is a very, very, very famous book on KDP. What should Danny do? Now, where can you see textures on this cover? The first texture that automatically stands out is Danny. Now, why did they use a texture on the word Danny? Well, first of all, they wanted it to stand out from the book title because Danny is the name of the main character's name. So what should Danny do? That makes his name stand out. But not just that, they used a crayon texture and they matched a bunch of different colors. But let's not talk about the colors. Let's talk about the texture. Why did they use a crayon-like texture? Because usually, who uses crayons? Kids. So when a kid sees crayons on the book cover, or when an adult sees crayons on a book cover, they automatically assume, oh, this is for kids, because only kids use crayons, especially colored crayons. So just by reading this, the word Danny, and it's in a crayon texture, we can tell that Danny is a kid. We can tell that he's probably a creative kid because of the texture that they used. Now, another texture they used is this one, this stamp-like texture. They could have made this bold and blue and all just one color with no texture, but it might take up too much space on the cover. It might not look as good. So what they did is, if you can see here, can you see this light parts? There's darker parts and lighter parts. That's to give it that stamped look. They added a stamped texture to this. That's a great way of adding texture to your title to show even more subconsciously about your story or your book cover or what's inside the book. Let's look at another example. This is David Goggins. Very, very, very good book. So how did David Goggins use texture? Obviously, he didn't design it. A designer designed it. But how did the designer use texture? Well, the David Goggins that we see here is the new David Goggins. It's a today David Goggins. But in the background, you can see very faintly, very lightly that this is the old David Goggins. It was a little bit chubby and whatever. He had a bunch of problems. So if we zoom in, we can see that not only did they decrease the opacity of the old David Goggins in the background, they also added a texture to the old David Goggins. What texture did they add? This pop filter thing, the one with the little dots. This guy, the guy looks amazing, super HD and everything, but the background, there's these dotted things. It's a dotted texture. Why is that? Because this is trying to show us that this is the old David Goggins. So to subconsciously show that this is the old David Goggins, you can have a lower opacity so you can barely see him because he's so far in the past you can't really see him. And you can also add a texture. In this case, that pop texture is more of an 80s thing or a 90s thing or an old school thing. So by adding that texture, it's basically telling us subconsciously this is the old David Goggins. So you can use texture to tell a story as well. Textures are very powerful. So let's look at this one. Again, from a distance, you might not see any textures, but let's look at the background. Can you see this texture in the background? It has almost like a stitching or like a cloth kind of feel. Why? Because that's the target audience they're going for. Target audience they're going for is more older people who like gardening and all of that. And this texture makes it look more old-fashioned. I can't describe exactly how it makes me feel, but this texture adds a little bit to the cover. It doesn't make it look as modern, because if this was just one color with the no texture, then it would just look a little bit plain, a little bit static. But with this texture, it makes it look a little bit more professional. It makes everything stand out a tiny bit more. Texture is all subconscious. You don't even notice the texture when you're scrolling through Amazon. But when you get the book and then the texture's there, and then you maybe look inside the book, even though the texture is subconscious, it still makes a difference. It makes your book stand out so much more from your competitors. Texture is so important. Let's look at one final one. So this is a very famous book. If you're looking at this, you probably already know what this book is. You've probably seen it a million times, but you probably never noticed the texture in the background. You probably noticed this guy here with all the text, and you might say, oh yeah, this is very good, very creative cover, and it is a very creative cover. But look at the texture in the background. Can you see the little, almost like raindrops or little darker lines and dots? That creates way more texture in the background. That creates more depth. It adds an extra layer to the background. It brings the cover to life. So this is not just an orange background. If you don't understand texture, then you're just going to say, oh, this is an orange background with black text and white text. But no, it's actually an orange background, and there's a texture layer, and then there's the text layer, and then they pick the font of the text, and then they use hierarchy to make sure we read this one second. There's a bunch of different things going on, but the texture is so important because it adds more depth to the cover. So texture is extremely important, even if it's the thing that's going to go most unnoticed in your cover. If you add textures, it will make your cover look so much better. This is one of the lessons I learned way too late in my KDP journey, and I wish I knew it before, because I could have made so many more better covers. So add texture and add layers to your covers. Build your covers. Don't just slap two things on. Don't just slap a background, slap a main image, and that's it. Add a background, add a texture, add a pattern maybe, add a texture to your foreground images. Use textures and elements to tell a story. Try and show what's inside your book. Don't just tell the people what's inside your book. Show it. Show it using your images. Show it using your texture. Just like the David Goggins one that we talked about. This book cover shows you that there was a guy a very long time ago who made a decision to become better today. And you can see the contrasting with the black and the white white, he's wearing black and white. There's contrast, the text creates contrast with the background, the hierarchy is there, and the texture in the background is there. There's a lot of elements all together.